So joining us now, South Carolina Congressman Trey Gowdy, chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, also member of the House Intel Committee. And you were one of those who saw some of the background documents related to this issue of whether or not there was a spy or an informant in the campaign late last week. Anything you can share on a broad scale about what went down there?
I think there are two things important to understand. Number one, the source of President Trump's frustration. Brennan said he should be in the dustbin of history. Comey said impeachment's too good of a remedy. Clapper doesn't like him. Loretta Lynch said call it a matter, not an investigation. Schiff said he had evidence of collusion before we even began the investigation. And 60 Democrats have voted to impeach him before Bob Mueller has come up with a single solitary finding. That's what's got him frustrated. What should have him heartened is the fact that Chris Wray, Rod Rosenstein, and all the senior folks at DOJ now were all Trump appointees. So here's what's fair to ask. What did the FBI do? When did they do it? What was the factual predicate upon which they took whatever actions they took? And against whom were they directed? But remember, Martha, it was President Trump himself who said, number one, I didn't collude with Russia, but if anyone connected with my campaign did, I want the FBI to find that out. It looks to me like the FBI was doing what President Trump said, I want you to do, find it out. He's not the target. So when Schiff and others don't make that clear, they're doing a disservice to our fellow citizens. He's not the target.
But this raises the question that the president raised in this one of those tweets. There were a lot of them, and which we talked about quite a bit here last week. Is if that were the case, why didn't they give him a little briefing? So here's what we found out. We do have somebody who asked some questions of George Papadopoulos. We do have somebody who's asked questions of Carter Page. Here's what you need to know.
I think defensive briefings are done a lot, and why the Comey FBI didn't do it, I don't know. But Chris Wray and Rod Rosenstein have at least made it clear to us Donald Trump was never the target of the investigation. He's not the current target in the investigation. Now, keep in mind, that can all change depending on what a witness says. But as of now, I think Chris Wray and Rod Rosenstein are stunned whenever people think Trump is the target of their investigation. I'll leave it up to them how to brief the president or how to brief his lawyers.
Was that point of view that you're talking about right now, was that strengthened when you went into this briefing last week?
Yes. I am even more convinced that the FBI did exactly what my fellow citizens would want them to do when they got the information they got, and that it has nothing to do with Donald Trump.
Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano, who's been listening to this. Judge, your thoughts on what the congressman and I were talking about in terms of this spy issue, whether or not the president should be concerned about it?
Well, full disclosure, Congressman Gowdy and I are buddies, and we have discussed this before. I listened to him tonight. He's really the perfect person to talk to about this because he's seen a lot of things that the rest of us have not seen. But the allegations by Mayor Giuliani over the weekend, which would lead us to believe that the Trump people think that the FBI had an undercover agent who inveigled his way into the campaign and was there as a spy on the campaign, seem to be baseless. There's no evidence for that whatsoever.
All right.
But the other allegation about this professor, whose name we're not supposed to mention, talking to people on the periphery of the campaign, that is standard operating procedure in intelligence gathering and in criminal investigations.
All right. But obviously, the president is concerned about the existence of that person. He feels like there was someone spying on the campaign. And, it just goes back to the other question about if that were the case, and the president said, I want to know if anybody's working with Russia, why was he not sort of clued in to that? And he talked about that in a tweet over this weekend, too. Should he have been?
In my opinion, yes. But quite frankly, that's a judgment call. Sometimes you don't want to tell people that you are worried about whether or not their organization has been invaded, so to speak, because you don't want that word to get out there and you don't want it to affect.
But Judge, they're claiming that invasion was so deep that it impacted the outcome of the election. That's what James Clapper says.
Yes.
So if that's happening, it's like a crime in progress.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, listen,
so how can you not step in and say, look, you are off the campaign. We want to know who you've been talking to. Is it not, stopping a crime in progress?
I understand the president's frustration that he was not informed of the fact that his campaign was being investigated, not because they think the campaign did anything wrong, but some people may have unwittingly, or perhaps wittingly, welcomed the Russian involvement in the campaign, and Donald Trump didn't know about it. Would I have told the candidate? I would have. But I respect the judgment of those who decided not to tell him. Now, look, if they were there for some nefarious reason, the one Giuliani suggested, to gather data from the campaign and pass it to the West Wing and pass it to Mrs. Clinton, I'd want to see evidence of that before I made an allegation that outrageous.
Judge, good to see you as always. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
It was President Trump himself who said, number one, I didn't collude with Russia, but if anyone connected with my campaign did, I want the FBI to find that out. It looks to me like the FBI was doing what President Trump said, I want you to do. Find it out. I am even more convinced that the FBI did exactly what my fellow citizens would want them to do when they got the information they got, and that it has nothing to do with Donald Trump.
Trey Gowdy, very interesting reaction. The House Oversight Committee chair last night, very interesting readout with Martha. Meanwhile, President Trump continues to go after the Department of Justice and the Bureau for the move. Alan Dershowitz, author of Trumped Up, How Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy. How you doing, sir? And good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, Gowdy is one of the few people who has now talked about a classified briefing from last Thursday. What do you make of the comments he has given now?
I think they're fairly persuasive. As a civil libertarian who doesn't believe this is a partisan activity, I think this is a wrong attempt to have a special counsel, but not partisan. I'm relatively satisfied with Gowdy's assurances. I would rather see the Inspector General look into this. Ultimately, the American people. Whenever you get any kind of an informer anywhere near a campaign, there has to be an assurance that it was not political or partisan in nature. I'm about halfway persuaded now by Congressman Gowdy's statement, and I suspect
so you use that word, persuasive, persuaded that the FBI acted properly. Is that what you're saying?
Right. I'm halfway persuaded. I want to hear the Inspector General, and I'd like to see the facts for myself. But I'm on the way to being persuaded.